Hello, my name is Chris Luscri, and I'm the executive producer of the feature film Youth on the March, directed by Mike Retter and produced by Allison Chhorn. The film is currently about to world premiere at the Adelaide Film Festival on Friday the 13th of October at Hartsmill in Port Adelaide. I'm here now with Mike Retter, the film's director, who has agreed to join me for a podcast to discuss the making of the film and related matters. G'day, Mike.
G'day, Chris. How you going?
I'm very well. How have you found this kind of experience leading up to sort of world premiering at a major film festival?
It's very new, very new experience, and because we've never really made a film like this, so it's a very new experience.
Now, the film was pretty much made without any money at all, certainly without funding. How do you negotiate the travails of making a no-budget film in Adelaide, in an area of Adelaide that's quite marginal?
I think it helps if you can be outside of the Adelaide CBD and not spend too much time within it, because we're not very productive, and you need to disconnect from that world, that thinking in that industry. And then you need to dive in, I think, to the history of film from around the world and contemporary film from around the world. And that becomes your universe instead of Adelaide. Yeah. Because we spend a lot of time in Adelaide talking about its problems. But it's always everybody else, while we're not making any films either. So I think that if you can get out of that thinking, and it's nowhere specific, it's not like institutional specific, it just seems to be something when you're in what we call the system. And if you can just get outside of the system, it's the easiest time to make a film with technology, and it's the easiest city to shoot in. You'd be crazy not to do it.
And this ties in, of course, with the experience of running the video store at Film Buff Central. I must admit, sort of being outside of that for a lot of it, even though I sort of did a little bit of contribution to the store, I wasn't really directly engaged for the majority of the time. What was the experience like in terms of networking and meeting other filmmakers, film students, people who ended up being sort of crew and cast in the film? Did you find Film Buff Central sort of a conducive experience to sort of helping to build a film community?
I think Film Buff Central was just a fluke, and I was young enough and old enough to do something crazy like that in my life. Something that was supposed to be a sort of pop-up shop, lasted for 3 years. It all happened really by accident. It's all the logical extension of. I remember getting on the bus and speaking to you on the phone, and you agreeing to give your entire DVD collection with all your criterions, all your imports, and all your staples of early sort of golden era of Hollywood. So that was already a good start for the collection. And then there was Toby Bramwell, who basically matched your contribution and then added some from his dad, who I think is a theatre writer. And then I had my collection, which was really quite small, but I was on the ground sort of keeping it open. And then, one thing leads to another, other people give films, and but then just the process of everything that, if that becomes your life, good luck being normal and trying to have a conventional job.
There's one thing I noticed too was that
it's quite entrepreneurial. That's one of the things. I did grow up in small business. I grew up in a pottery in the country.
Your father's pottery?
Yeah, in my father's pottery. So, I think there was something entrepreneurial on a very small scale. I mean, we struggled as a family, but it was, it was a pretty idyllic childhood in most senses.
And also in the sense, I guess, of like doing things that are very hands-on. I mean, how much more hands-on can you get than pottery in a sense? And your way of making films is also that way.
Sorry, the big book in the house was this book. It's like an encyclopedia of self-sufficiency. Essentially, told you how to build everything from structures to cooking and things for the home. But my parents are pretty old, and we can say we're all individuals and all this kind of stuff, but we're so much determined by our parents. And my parents are not baby boomers. They were actually born before or during World War II. And so there's a very unhippie feeling with my parents. And a very kind of, they were too old for the 60s. But I kind of like that, because like all these sort of hipsters that are kind of doing things that are, artistically like horrendous, they're kind of the product of boomers, and I just love not being one. Like I'm not really affected by the boomer generation. My parents weren't boomers, and the people that we spent time with when I was little were people older than my parents. I had like a guy called Uncle Dave with a white beard and a beret, who was a silversmith who lived near one of the beaches. And he was a paratrooper in World War II. Like, there was no way he was my fucking uncle. So even older than my parents by quite a bit. And my father would come and play chess with him, and I was sort of learning chess. Like, that was the sort of upbringing just with older people. I'm so glad that I'm not connected to this sort of boomer class and not the child of boomers. I feel so different. Like, everyone likes all this mid-century furniture. It's all chipboard. It's all shit. And I was taught from a very early age that you want solid wood. Like, the values are just so fucking different. Anyway, I know that's a crazy tangent, but I really feel we're so defined by our parents. Before things like aesthetic and stuff in film. Like, we're much more defined by our parents and the stuff that we're going to make. Look at you. You're making stuff about Italian. You're making a documentary about an Italian, one of the early independent filmmakers in Australia who was an Italian, and a photographer who used to film your family. It's just, the filmmaking doesn't fall far from the tree.
No, and I think it's important to preserve a degree of continuity with not only with our immediate past, but with our cultural past as well. And I see those tangents in your own work, but in a very sort of fractured and fragmented way, more like in the sense of their loss rather than seeing it directly. It's very melancholic in a way, especially Youth on the Mark.
It's a very it's very funny being post-colonial and self-hating.
It's the self-hating part I can kind of understand from a Catholic perspective, but I got to say that the kind of Protestant sense of self-sufficiency is something that doesn't come naturally to me. Maybe I'm a bit more wasteful in that than you. But I want to go back to that book though, because that strikes me as really interesting, and you've never told me about this before. Yeah, tell me more about this book. Like, what Bible of self-sufficiency did you say?
Well, no, it's just called it was a book called Self-Sufficiency, and it was like an encyclopedia. But just to jump back to filmmaking, because we're probably boring people with the sort of tangential stuff, and it'd be great if this was just an uncut podcast with all our slip-ups and everything. Not edited to make anybody seem like anything.
I don't have time to edit.
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy, but I would have to say that one of the most important philosophical things about filmmaking right now is I would just say 2 points. First is on a stylistic and thematic level, to make a really artistic work in Australia will probably mean you have to work independently. I'm not saying anything specifically about any particular body or group, but I think our output is artistically very poor. And when I speak to all cinephiles in Australia, they generally say the same thing, with exceptions of people like Emil Courtin-Wilson or Rolf de Heer. You then have to go back in time to things like Snowtown and Boxing Day for something that's really has sort of satisfied the sort of cinephiles, people really interested in world cinema. So I think that it's been so long since a good one has been sort of churned out. There's been a lot of compromised work. Van Diemen's Land is very good, but then again, that didn't come out of the system either. It was independent. I think that you have to work independently. And then my second point is, independent cinema needs to be unstoppable. You have to design it and come up with a concept and follow through as if it were unstoppable. And so I've tried to learn a lot from the early UFC, like the early Ultimate Fighting Championship, where the least violent of the art forms dominated the first three. And these were open tournaments with people that were giants, almost 7 foot tall and gigantic. And the Gracie family, who helped start the competition because they felt they were undefeatable, put one of their sons in the tournament, and he wasn't even their best, but he won using the techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
I remember you telling me about this and not quite understanding the connection to filmmaking.
Well, what it is just understanding reality. So you come out of the fight unscathed when people are losing teeth that night and being kicked in the head. You come out unscathed and victorious, even though you're smaller. He was the smallest fighter. And that's really important because independent filmmakers are smaller in power, I suppose, financial power. So if you see that, you know, in terms of sort of being smaller on the, in the ring, it just means that your technique and your mind needs to be incredibly efficient. And therefore, I see something like the Gracie family coming over to America, working a crap job as a cleaner or something, but then starting the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that started in Brazil in a garage, and then within a few months, celebrities are there and everything because it's unstoppable, and it was unstoppable for a long time and dominated all the early UFC. And then this thing called MMA comes along, which is really turning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into also a striking art. But it just shows that 2 or 3 people working together can change a form, but also the sort of methodology of a form. So that's what I'm interested in, is trying to instill a kind of, okay, all the film schools are kind of teaching as if there were an industry. There hasn't really been an industry since the 90s, right? And not that it was ever like a really big industry, but it was healthy, right? Now what we need to do is, instead of creating these kind of people dependent on industry, we need to teach people to be independent filmmakers. So when they leave film school, they're ready to shoot a feature and they know what it takes, they know how to do it. And bloody hell, they should. They've gone to film school. So that's my feelings, is that independent filmmakers need to be unstoppable, and that's the mindset they need to have. They need to shoot a script they know they can shoot. They need to write a script they know will be interesting enough for actors to want to be on for free. And then they need to use equipment that they can get their hands on, which is very often our own. I mean, eventually you're going to accumulate some equipment. And the dedication to see through post-production, which is a huge mountain. But that's all. And then it's just doing it. And so much of it is attitude, So that's what I think is important. And that comes back to the self-sufficiency book, is being able to solve problems and being able to create production value, and just being clever, and maybe having an actual reason to make the film, which I think comes a little bit with age. I think when you're young, you just want to smash things apart and have a sort of, slapdash, experimental Godard instinct. But eventually you might want to actually say something, personal, and put yourself out there to be, I think, judged by, being sincere and not just, ironic and silly. I'm hoping to be transitioning to that.
Yeah, well, there's a definite advance on your first film, Stanley's Mouth, with the new one. Certainly in terms of its of formal achievement, but also in terms of its narrative drive. That there's a definite sense that there's a story, certain ideas and feelings being reached out in a more linear way in this film than there was in Stanley's Mouth. But what also strikes me is that this question of independent filmmaking, and being able to tailor the method to the idea in such a way that it's sustainable. I often find that in talking to sort of independent filmmakers that I know, that very few of them come at it from that sort of pragmatic perspective, where um, we're used to sort of making films, feature films, once every 5 years if you're lucky, if you're an independent feature filmmaker. But the idea of being able to produce work at a clip on a regular basis, making use of available resources, and scaling the idea to fit those resources, seems strangely enough to be something that comes more out of pragmatic commercial work than it does the fine arts. I think the fine arts are a really bad training for pragmatic filmmaking in a way.
Well, the fine arts, unfortunately, are rooted in universities, and so you have a cultural problem of unheroic people. I think that come out of university. So you don't expect any resourcefulness there. I mean, they're basically taught to expand the bureaucracy. Why do you think they would be particularly resourceful? They're not. There are exceptions, dropouts. People that drop out, I think, can learn another way, or people that manage to do a few big projects after uni. But then you have a lot of people, and we're talking about in the arts here. Obviously, I like uni students who are doing sciences and health, things like that. But I think in the arts, they're just too tied in to the bureaucracy. And I mean, you have exceptions when you have people that will take on a big project, and then that defines them. But otherwise, if you don't do anything really good, you'll just be defined for having gone to university, which is all theory, just too much theory. So some of the universities are better than the others. My favourite university is actually Adelaide, because I think they managed to have an organic film culture there with their cinema society. So that's the first time I've heard film students actually working together, or just uni students generally working together, to sort of benefit cinema, like outside of class, on a kind of large scale. I mean, there might be more, but I just don't think that anything quite compares to the Cinema Society. But the great irony is Adelaide doesn't actually have a great film department, or film faculty. I think it's got just production and maybe a little bit of theory, very little. But it's got that organic culture, which I think is more important. And several of those were involved in the video shop, like Nick Ingerson, Justin Martinick, Bree, various people. And then, of course, Allison Chhorn, who comes out of Uni SA as a visual arts student. I think she's become a very advanced producer and editor now. It's often in the unlikely places,
Let's talk about Allison for a sec, because it strikes me that the collaboration you both have going at the moment is extremely unique and also a little bit mysterious. I've worked with both of you on and off, but pretty much independently, but I still really don't have a sense of how you guys sort of do it together. I'm really interested in sort of picking apart some of the details of that collaboration and who does what, and who defers and how the ideas develop and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a very fluky collaboration. I think it's we both are in a constant battle of having superior common sense, and so we're just trying to constantly apply common sense to every task. We have a lot in common, feelings in how to make a film, generally speaking. Like we know what it takes, and this is our second film together, and we learned a lot the first time round, and the horrors last time round, particularly in post. And so, we learned a valuable lesson of actually why you need to write a script. I know you learned that in film school, but it's a pretty good lesson to, attempt to make a feature film without a script and then spend a year in post. That's a fun. No, it's not. It's a horrible mess. But you learn so much, and because we were able to show at different places and it did get a bit of exposure, there was enough energy the second time round to, I think, pull off a narrative film. Yeah, I mean, Allison's role is really half the film. As producer, she's also co-writer. And we basically write straight ahead shooting scripts. You know, they're not even really to share with other people. It's just directions for where we want the camera to move and what we want it to show, and things like that. We're writing that immediately. Because
so how does the writing work? Is one person dictating, one person's writing, or the other person, and then there's sort of more feedback, or is there constant interplay?
I think that there's a complete mix. I write some at home. She writes some at home. She'll often write down when we get together, but we'll go over that again. And then the writing doesn't stop until you've locked off the film, because we'll write pickups. I wrote entire new scenes for sort of pickups along the way, because as a filmmaker you're constantly thinking as a writer, because it's just so efficient. You're doing everything as a collaboration. It's easy to inject pickups, and on a low budget film, pickups are pretty cheap because there's no more money to spend. Like it doesn't require more money because it never required money to begin with. But you can't shoot forever, but you'll always be able to get a few pickups, pretty much for nothing if you're shooting it yourself, and then they can save the film basically.
So you're organising actors and crew, and the question comes up of how do we work out an equal and fair collaboration with these people on no money? How do you manage that?
You'd be very upfront from the beginning that there is no money.
Yeah.
But you say your intentions, which is to make a successful film, and that if it's successful, we'll just carve up the profits like deferred salary. Actors want to act. Like actors go to film school to act in films, and if there's no films, they're crying out for more independent productions, particularly movies. There's a lot of shorts. Shorts are mostly done in the film schools. There are some independent shorts too, but there's not a lot of features. There really isn't. There's a handful every year. From a population of 1.5 million, many millions of dollars thrown at cinema, there's not actually that many features made, really.
I would say that stands across Australia, not just South Australia. But I think the problem is particularly striking in South Australia, especially compared to the films that were being made in the 70s. Yeah. Well, there just really aren't that many. There's really literally only a handful of films, maybe 6 or 7 features a year in South Australia, if that. And that includes stuff like Youth. And I wonder why that is. But we've had many discussions about the way in which certain methodologies, let's say, are privileged over others. And how sort of no-budget filmmaking can represent a threat.
That's why it's really important not to go over the same narratives of these guys are conspiring for other groups to not make films. Just make your films unstoppable. Yeah. Like basically come up with an idea that's unstoppable. Even go for funding if you want to, but make it so even if you don't get that funding, the film is possible. Like you've got to make your filmmaking unstoppable. That's I honestly think there's a lot to learn from judo and jiu-jitsu with just navigating those daily things, but just getting the broad fundamentals right, having the equipment, locations and actors, and the ability to edit. You should be able to do that with a couple of people.
Yeah.
It's really annoying that this needs to be even preached. It's just, if you want to make a film, make a film. Okay, you won't be able to have the full-time job somewhere else, but what do you want to define you? If you're a filmmaker, you make films. It's just you got to, even in like Canada, which is quite socialized like Australia, they encourage you to make your first feature on the credit card, which means you go out and do it. And we're quite similar in the sense that we have public financing and everything. So I quite like the Canadian ethic, which has generated plenty of good work in the system, plenty of good work outside the system, and plenty of good work invested from the United States. So yeah.
So getting back to Youth again, that's a good example of what you're talking about, because the film came about when you realised you had a pretty amazing location that you wouldn't have for an extended period of time. that you really needed to get in and use it if the film was going to be viable?
I was living above a cafe, and I had the almost entire upstairs area, which was like the interior of a house, for 5-6 weeks or something, right? So we jumped into pre-production of a script we had just we wrote like a 30-page unfinished script, which we decided to make because we got this location, and that because we should just do it. I pulled together resources from different people, Mihaela O'Malley,
who was also credited as a producer on the film.
Yeah, like so she produced large portions of it. Certain scenes that had a lot of extras, she was heavily involved. It was crazy. We drove around extras on the Cambodian Christian community bus because we got access to this bus and we could drive extras to different locations to shoot them in, and it worked really well. Like we shoot a whole day, including night and day scenes, and we just fed them in the break periods between a day and night and stuff like that. It was awesome. Some of the best shots were working with the extras. They were all really good. A lot of them acting students. So it was just like that. They were very easy to work with because of mobilized and doing different takes over and over again, like young people walking in amongst trees and stuff, a sideways tracking shot from the car, like different things like that.
And how did you find the experience of shooting again vertically? This is like the third project, including some material you shot for the first 9/16 Film Festival. The third project shooting vertically, and your camera work has been improving really well.
Well, I worked out how to shoot vertical, at least a way to shoot vertical as opposed to just let's shoot vertical. So I just worked out that using a wide angle was better, and tracking forwards and backwards was particularly good, and different things like that, and just a stronger sense of longer takes, what's in the frame. Just being more cinema conscious.
Yeah, and it's certainly a very different approach to framing than Stanley's Mouth, which is a lot more shallow focus and a lot more close-ups, sort of actions fragmented across sort of montage, you could say, rather than Stanley's Mouth.
It's a crude film, but some people, it's a crude film, but some people prefer the first film. Yeah. Not many. Most people think this tends to be a leap, but there are some people that prefer the first. That they prefer Stanley's Mouth because of how crude and long lens it is, and how it's oppressive. So
what was it like working with another young person as a lead, young male as a lead? This time a non-actor.
Well, yeah, I think he'd done like a little bit of theatre. He was starting a play when he started our film. I think he dropped out of that play and was pretty dedicated to the film. Very good. I mean, 90% of directing is casting. I think that you're basically choosing someone to be central to the film, and they can either, make it work or not make it work. I always think of Coppola, casting his daughter in the third Godfather film. As how casting can really ruin a film and stop it having credibility, even though he made the first two masterpieces. Casting is very important, and it was very hard to cast the mum because I think there was a lot asking for very much an adult woman. It was quite a lot to ask, and we had a few people audition. Some who agreed to the role and then backed out, I think, when they either read the script, just because of what was demanded of them. We had some great sort of eastern suburbs, ex-model mums that, would have been very photogenic and very interestingly, like long and kind of could be very surreal. Definitely worthy of casting, I think. But once they read the script, it was horrifying to their eastern suburbs sensibilities, and what will the neighbours think, kind of thing. And I had someone ring up just to be in any role, was just sort of interested, and that was Steph Rossi. And then we just talked, even theoretically, I said, once we had an actress back out, I thought, well, what if you just acted, just a couple of years older, and then you'd be a real young mum for this boy. And then we kind of, she just took it on. Like, she just has a very great work ethic.
I think it's really, it's changed my opinion completely on what is needed to actually get a film, off the ground and produced. And I'm starting to think now that it's much more just about getting the structure down right, and then the basic resources of each scene, like just having them clear, rather than specific shot direction, specific lines of dialogue, etc. But in fact, if that's the case, I often feel that most scripts tend to be overwritten, and that's perhaps one reason why a lot of Australian films feel kind of overly mannered. There tends to be like too much emphasis placed on, hitting the beats of the script rather than actually sort of fluidly working your way through a scene.
A lot of them just don't even seem like like they want to be cinema, and you can be very conservative and very cinematic. Like in terms of just locked off shots, you can be very cinematic, but we just have different, sort of almost variations on Home and Away. It's Home and Away with grading. I think that we have very poor aesthetic in Australia. Some things are just so devoid of it or any aesthetic thought. It's a script and a cinematographer who's hired for the job, who shoots everything a certain way. There's nothing. It's almost like TV. It doesn't seem like a particularly directed, thing.
Well, it's all just coverage, 2 shots, over the shoulders, shot, reverse shot, and, mostly dialogue scenes. That's one thing we tend to do a lot of in Australian cinema as well, is like mostly dialogue scenes,
It's aesthetically lacking. But every cinephile knows that. It's the unspoken secret. Every cinephile knows this. Like, they don't necessarily write great articles about it, but every cinephile, most critics know this or agree with this, that Australian films we're going through a bad period, and we're probably championing a bunch of stuff that's not very good. Nobody can tell anymore. Identity politics seems to have just taken over so much that nobody can tell if the film's good or if we're just saying it's good, because it's party policy. Like, we're kind of so loosely a part of some kind of vague art scene group that we march in the same direction. It's, that's just what it feels like. And yet, every cinephile will tell you, our films are terrible. And then, and this will be someone that works in a uni that can actually change some of this. Like, that's these are the kind of conversations I think that I had. I know people from every uni in SA, every, or someone from every film school. After so many years, you end up meeting so many that you kind of get to form the different quirks that each film school has. It's pretty fascinating. Like, I just had dinner with Peter Thurmer tonight. Peter's a good friend and sort of mentor. He basically ran a TAFE equivalent course in terms of how, it's outcomes on paper, but I think it actually generates a pretty good ethic, like a pretty good,
Well, that makes so much more films. The idea there is much more sustainable if you want to learn to be a filmmaker than the TAFE course was,
Yeah, and you'll certainly probably get into the industry if you want to, and good people from the industry lecture there, like James Curry. Imagine James Curry teaching people about sound. He's one of the greatest in the world, so.
So what's next in terms of projects? Because I know we've been talking about a couple, which I won't sort of preempt unnecessarily unless you want to go there. But this film is set to premiere on Friday. I have a pretty good feeling about it. I think, I have a good feeling. We've already got a couple of good reviews out. People know about the film, so hopefully they'll come along. But your methodology, and this is fascinating, is not at all dependent on acclaim or forward industry traction. Let's say that you could you can jump into the next project with nothing again if you really needed to.
Yeah, and you learn more every time, and some famous directors talk about that you learn which corners you can cut, that you can sort of know what you need. That sometimes it's just a person and a wall, and it's a great scene. So,
like Bresson and Man Escaped, you know.
Oh, look!
Why aren't we making more films like that in Australia?
I had lunch with Allison Chhorn, producer, co-writer, editor, sound designer of this film today. We talk intensely about film, and we have formed a methodology. Like, so much of it's based on what works for her, and then I kind of accept as part of the process because she's bringing a lot of common sense, very practical.
Give an example. Give a solid.
Well, she grew up on a farm, and I guess I grew up kind of a little bit rural, and it's just basic practical. Look, if we want a shot, we drive to the place and we film it. Like, it's seriously no more of a riddle than that. Like, it's like, I really want a shot of this place. I want to film it in this way. Let's take the camera down there and do it. Or we have a lot of fun, recording audio, like, amongst the wool stores. I mean, tonight I was just recording a piece of music that's in the film, but then re-recording it through my stereo and then using the camera mic. Because unlike a shotgun, the camera mic really has a strong compressor style microphone that's kind of to really take out noises, but because it's on the camera body, you don't want every vibration, but it boosts up everything else, and it does a certain thing to sound. So to make the sound bigger, like it's in a bigger space. There's a particular scene with a particular song sung. I don't want to go into it, but that's just one thing I was doing tonight. And the way we work together is I go, Allison, can you please send the MP3 of that track? Because we just changed the reverb of it today, but I wanted to record it in this ambient space. She sends it across, I do it. I mean, she's editing mostly solitary. She did a rough cut of this film pretty quick, like I think about a month or 8 weeks, entirely by itself. And I knew immediately we had a film. And she schedules the film, and we kind of work it out. It's a lot of algebra, a lot of like who's available this day. Trying to shoot several scenes on one location one day for different parts of the narrative. It's just constant problem solving, constant common sense problem solving, and being resourceful, not wasting time, resources. Just being very practical, and also giving people a chance who are not there for the money, that they just want to really excel as well. Like, it's just practical. It's like this in every other successful film country. It's not. It's just how films get made. But I would say, but the simplest way to put it is you just got to be unstoppable. And the record button doesn't discriminate. If you want to go make a film, pick up the camera. Nothing's stopping you, Yeah, I think you should make that film starring your dad.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Actually, in fact, we will talk about it in person on Friday. When me and Nick fly down.
How about you just give me a one paragraph view, because everyone's heard about my film tonight, but you've got a possible film that you'll make with Nick Ingerson.
There's a couple of projects we got sort of developing, but this one I like particularly is a detective story set in and around inner northern suburbs in Melbourne, sort of a factory setting, Brunswick, sort of really kind of low rent, dilapidated warehouses. And the film follows a middle-aged, disgruntled factory employee whose name is Rocco, who is loosely modelled on my father. And he uncovers what he thinks is a conspiracy within this family business, which he's employed at. He's also married into the family.
And it kind of seems because it's so built on fear and paranoia, that it is very unclear as to what's actually happening, right?
It is. I don't want to give too much away because we're still working out the details of the plot. But yeah, there's a sort of big indebtedness to kind of 70s paranoid conspiracy thrillers, particularly by Pacula. Films like The Parallax View, I really like that film. And just trying to sort of capture, but it's also about sort of capturing the kind of atmosphere of these suburbs. I mean, that's as big a reason to do the film for me as modelling a character after my father, which would give me a lot of opportunity to sort of play these low-key observational scenes against the sort of plot levels.
I reckon your father is like three Bogarts stuck together.
Yeah, my father is amazing.
Like in terms of cinematic presence.
Yeah. He's got one of the most expressive, listlessly expressive faces. He can break out in these giant expressions, or he can just kind of hold this kind of stoic, expressively inexpressive kind of face.
His resting face can break a brick.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
Well, you okay? So you're coming to the screening on October 13th.
October 13th, 7 p.m. at Harts Mill in Port Adelaide. I encourage everyone to go. There will be some surprise faces there, and it'll be a very good evening. It'll be very lively. There'll be a film screening. I don't know, they're doing...
I'll just spoil everything and say Adele Hahn is introducing it. Really happy to have Adele, who's
Adele's wonderful.
a great,
absolutely.
great supporter of cinema, and Dr. Nicholas Godfrey from Flinders University will be doing a Q&A, and he's one of the OGs of cinema. So
certainly indie cinema in Adelaide. He made a feature film which is kind of legendary amongst our circle of friends who've seen it.
Yeah. I like to track down rare films, and tracking that down was awesome because it's almost like a suppressed film, but it's like it might need sort of cutting down. It's a little bit rough, but I got a lot out of it, and there's some awesome scenes in it, like cinematically speaking. Great camcorder cinema, like. Yes, yeah, really good.
It can be done. It can be done for sure.
Definitely. It's easier and easier to do, but at the same time being incredibly modern in terms of equipment. I think that what needs to fuel you is a real deep love of cinema and its history. Otherwise, you'll move on to other forms which are not cinema or watered down cinema. I still think the feature film is the optimum. Format. I don't think TV has gone anywhere near where film can go, like aesthetically speaking, and even in terms of narrative. TV doesn't matter how good the TV is. It could be Breaking Bad. It's still about hooking you for the next episode. It's still TV. It's TV trying to be like film, and but it as I always say, Breaking Bad has only really caught up with The Godfather. There's nothing touching Tarkovsky or things like that.
I would say that these are generally wise words, but the timing may be a bit off, given that this is the year of the Twin Peaks revival. I would say, on the whole, yeah, I agree with you. I think that cinema is something very distinct than television, and I've been largely kind of suspicious or unconvinced about the move to kind of close the divide between cinema and television. I don't know that that's an entirely healthy thing.
Gallery is completely overrated as well. It's a very elitist thing for, people. It's not. I don't think it's very inclusive.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the goal really is. Most people will tell you this if they're being honest. Is they really want this film to be seen in a big cinema by as many people as possible. I mean, surely that should be the goal. And it's a fairly good goal. And a couple of decades ago, it was a very achievable and very populist goal as well. This idea that people can go to the cinema to see a film shouldn't be a rarefied thing. And it's increasingly becoming that way with the ticket prices.
I think that the kind of philosophy of making sure that independent filmmaking is unstoppable. Doesn't stop at the final cut. It doesn't stop at getting into a major festival. You need to think then what next. And we're already thinking and talking to people in regards to showing it in universities. Maybe being programmed in a summer program at one of our art cinemas. There's a couple of other regional film festivals in SA, that some of which are kind of like relevant to the subject matter. Like I think that there's still use the channels that are there. Ultimately, I would start a cinema or take over a cinema and just have volunteers run it, so we've got another space. But without sort of diving into that, I still think working with universities and things like that. Like the point is make a good film, and you'll find places to show it. It's not like Boxing Day was like a blockbuster, but it was shot on a camcorder at the time. But that was shown in many festivals around the world, and I think it got a small run in some parts of Australia. But it's still talked about. It really is still talked about. It's a marvelous film to learn from, like in terms of camera movement and what's in the frame. It's quite extraordinary to watch. Like that's a director shooting his own film, and I think that once you learn you can do that, that's the shortest distance from A to B. Like that becomes quite unstoppable. But what if I'm a director and I want someone else to shoot it? I automatically make things more complicated. So I think that learning from the small, efficient films like that, that's how you learn to become a filmmaker. And that film has an awesome 2-disc DVD. So just buy it. Like buy it online. It's very, very good. I've never been to film school, but good DVD. Do you know what's a really good? What I think is one of the best DVD extras on any film. It's Mysteries of Love, the documentary about Blue Velvet.
Yeah, that is a good documentary.
That's obviously made with an understanding of the subject matter and great material, which is articles with everyone, including Lynch, although they're a few years earlier, but plenty of it. And all the cast and people in technical roles, and we'll just have a kind of segment on, I think it's still working with Alan R. Splett, I think at the time. It's got the same cinematographer as Eraserhead, so you've got this great continuity and talking about the old days. That's the thing. It's great to have people to work with. That's ultimately what filmmaking is, a collaboration. I'm very, very lucky to have to cast well. And to have a good producer, and I cast well because she's casting too. I remember with our first film, like we needed to see Stanley again because she just needed to see his face. That's all. She just didn't really remember, and then she immediately goes, "Yeah, this is the one." And casting is very exciting. Writing is exciting. Writing is great because it doesn't cost anything. And
I've been doing so much more collaborative writing now with people, and I love it. I always thought that I really liked editing, and I do really like editing. But this kind of writing that I'm doing now, I love. Just workshopping a script with a collaborator who I really trust. It's great. It's so much fun.
Yeah. I like that. I've learned to love it the hard way. From making film without a script, but it's your best friend, particularly because you can conceive ambitious technical things on a very low budget. Actually, can I ask you just while you're here, like let's say we'll end it on the hour mark, hey, at the very latest. Just I'm looking at my recording. What's it like? Being in the Melbourne film scene, is it really the utopia that Adelaide thinks of it as?
Look, I came at it from a very different. I went to Melbourne for a project, for one project, which was a Melbourne-based project. But I do have friends that have moved to Melbourne because they wanted to crack the quote-unquote film scene in a very sort of generalised, ambiguous way. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I can compare the two. I can see that Adelaide obviously has less production, but it's about comparable. I mean, the problems to do with film production are the same. There isn't a lot of widespread industry support for the kind of filmmaking that we like, or for alternative methodologies. And a lot of the people in Melbourne are just, it's like more of the same as Adelaide rather than anything and comparatively different. So there's more people doing corporate video, more people coming out of advertising, online screen platforms, mixed media and all this kind of stuff. But not necessarily more people making feature films. And this is something that our mutual friend Bill Mazoulis will tell you, that Melbourne was at one point a really good place for independent, truly independent underground Australian filmmaking, but no more,
Yeah, there are still underground filmmakers in Melbourne, like Saden's kind of, or Seiden Salkic is.
Seiden Salkic, yes, you're one of the best underground filmmakers working at the moment in Australia, for sure.
Is he ever shown in the local Melbourne festival?
No, I mean Seiden's a very particular case, kind of like a universe unto himself, in that he is a bit of a one-man band as well as a kind of Renaissance band. So he's a musician, a visual artist, a performance artist, and a filmmaker. So he does all these sort of roles himself, often inside his own filmmaking. And we don't have an industry or even independent outside of industry model for what that looks like in terms of how do you support that kind of work. It's not very easy. It's very hard to support that kind of work because it's not really open to a lot of input from the outside. And we have a collaborative model in Australia where, if you're going to sort of work at the level of making feature films, you have to get as many people involved as possible. And then that turns into a kind of bit of a mutual backslapping kind of thing. But Seiden's films, and to a degree, you and Allison as well, although I think you guys are a bit more open to outside collaboration. There tends not to be an appreciation for these kinds of films, even though these kinds of films, on the whole, quite rough, but a lot more distinctive and a lot more poetic than mainstream narrative films. Even when these films do narrative, they do it in a very particular way, a very distinctive way.
There's a reason why they're rough, and that's because they're completely independent as well. I mean, you don't want that to be an excuse for making a bad film, and I'm not saying that plenty of bad films are made, but some of the
difference between a good film and a bad film is all about sensibility and
like just sensibility and aesthetic can be found in zero budget films, and sometimes it's not found in a $1 million film. I'm
really inspired by the South Korean filmmaker Hong Sang-soo at the moment. He's a guy who he very much works like a painter. He has 2 or 3 crew members with him. He starts each film just by getting a general sense of the locations he wants to shoot in and the actors that he wants to work with. Usually no more than 2 or 3 actors and 2 or 3 locations he'll have in mind when he starts out a project. And what he does is, he doesn't really even chart a general scenario. He'll go to the set in the morning with the actors. No, in fact, he'll get up really early in the morning. I think he says he gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, writes that day's script, and then goes to the set and workshops that scene with the actors and then films. That's kind of like how a painter works, really. And because he's able to work in this very, very small, the worlds of his films are kind of like these tiny constellations of, a cafe, a bar, someone's apartment, and then a street, So he's working in miniature, and because he does that, he's able to set up a methodology that is both incredibly precise and incredibly practical. And so he makes, I think he made 3 films this year, 3 features, and that's a pretty remarkable guy, someone who can do that, and most of the films are great,
I understand that there's a lot of filmmakers who are not film buffs, there's a lot of filmmakers that know nothing about film, and I think that's a problem, but one of the consequences, I think, of being a filmmaker is you just don't have the time to watch too much, and definitely on your down periods, you've got to be, I think, drinking from the well, like you've got to be
you have to be watching films, otherwise.
Yeah, but particularly if you're just trying to learn certain things, absolutely. And I think delving into, I mean, I don't really read a lot about film. I don't really enjoy reading, but I'm constantly listening to podcasts, lectures, interviews, I could watch the UFC, or read a book about the Gracie family and their Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I can learn, principles, low budget principles for being unstoppable that way, and just apply it to filmmaking. If your filmmaking scene that you're in is stagnant, why would you want to be learning from it? Why would you even listen to it? Like after a while, it will sound cuckoo, because you're learning, to be nimble and move fast and shoot all your exterior shots illegally, avoiding paperwork, and just, there's something to be said for being prolific. You certainly learn that way. Yeah. It's
as long as you're getting better, though. Like, some filmmakers are just prolific and they don't get necessarily any better.
I'm lucky now because, like, my films are, I think it's getting twice as good each time. But there'll come a point where, I got my first bad review today. I'll send it to you. Yeah, I mean, it's funny to read. It says that the film has no point, and the way it's cut is just fucking insane. So, I'll send it to you. I'm not really going to pass judgment on it. I can't be really objective about my work. I won't really comment on the review. But yeah, I mean, we've posted it, like posted on Twitter. I think we're going to post it on Facebook.
I have to. Let me find it. Maybe I should read it out loud in a curdled voice to close this podcast, or maybe not.
No, don't read it. Don't read it on the internet. No, but I would encourage people to find it. I'll tell you the critic that did it. Like,
Don't.
No, and then people can look it up. Like that's up to them. No, he's a nice guy. That's all right. What's his name? Steve J. Donahue. Steve J. Donahue is on Twitter, and I believe he's probably on Facebook. He has his own website. He writes reviews.
Martyr.
Yeah, but don't read the review on the podcast. But I would encourage people to go read it.
How did this guy hear about the film?
I told him about the film. I won't go into it. I just said, hey, if you want to watch it and review it, and so he did a piece on it. But at the same time, we've had good reviews too, like mostly good reviews, and it's been very exciting what some people are saying about it. There's a funny buzz about the film. It's, I'll even swear, it's fucking weird. Like it's, there is a buzz around this film. It's a very new experience to have that.
So the screening is on this Friday, the 30th of October at 7 p.m. at Harts Mill in Port Adelaide. Please get in contact with us if you're interested in coming and want to meet us. We'd be very happy to meet you.
But by the time this podcast go out, some people will hear it before the screening, but some people will be hearing it after the screening. It will be showing at Adelaide University, Flinders University, and other screenings. We're looking at showing it in Melbourne, maybe before the end of the year, so November. Just if you sign up to the Port Film Co-op Facebook or something, that's one way of finding out about the screening. Otherwise, it will have a life after the festival, and we're already sort of working out a sort of strange de facto cinematic run through obscurely placed cinemas, in those principalities that are universities. It's very strange.
But please do come this Friday if you're hearing this, listening to it right now, and are curious. It is well worth your time.
Such a big location that even if a lot of people came, I don't think you could really fill it out. It's a big warehouse, and there'll be a big vertical screen erected. So I'm told that the film will be shown on.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. See ya.
Yes, bye.